Hey guys, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Caitlin, and for today's video we are going to be doing my May wrap-up, so all the books I read in the month of May. I read a total of 6 books this month, and I'm really proud of myself because I have been in such a bad reading slump all year, and then April came around and I started reading a couple more books, and then May came around and I was just like back in my reading game. I haven't read this many books in a month in such a long time, and I'm super excited to kind of just be back into reading again because I've missed it so much. I'm also really excited to be back making YouTube videos again because it's been something that I've been thinking about for a really long time. So definitely subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get started into the books I read in May. So 3 out of the 6 books I read physical copies of, and the other 3 books I read on my Kindle. So we're gonna start with the books that I have a physical copy of first. So the first book I read this month was Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. This is her YA debut into romance, and if you know anything about me, you need to know that Talia Hibbert is hands down one of my favorite romance authors. She just does such a good job of balancing comedy with romance in a way that you're just laughing out loud reading her books, but you're also getting just such a swoon-worthy romance that just makes you just feel super light and super warm on the inside. So I'm so excited when I heard that she was coming out with a YA romance because I don't read young adult romance or really young adult fiction anymore, but I will do anything for Talia Hibbert. Like, I will read anything that woman puts out, period. So Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute follows our 2 main characters, Bradley and Celine. These are 2 ex-best friends who were friends when they were children, were friends when they were younger, were friends through middle school, but then when it came high school, I believe, they kind of started going into different friend groups. Bradley started hanging out with the popular kids. He was acting more of like a jock, and Celine didn't really fit that vibe, so they kind of went their separate ways. So they're ex-best friends that are forced to work together in a wilderness expedition for a chance to win a scholarship. Their story starts with them being enemies, then slowly kind of rebuilding their friendship again as they kind of figure out, like, why did we really not become friends anymore, kind of being open with their feelings about feeling betrayed and stuff like that, and then slowly kind of forming this romantic relationship with each other. And I absolutely adored this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I just loved the way that Bradley and Celine worked through their problems with each other, and I loved how it wasn't like an immediate fix. Like, they really sat down and had conversations about, like, well, this is how you made me feel. In response to that, it was like, well, that was never my intention. And just really having that open communication with each other at such a young age. Like, these characters were only like 17 years old, and they're so mature for their age with how they're just able to express themselves and to just be who they are and like kind of figure out what they want from life. This was so wholesome and so pure, and I felt like Bradley and Celine were just such the perfect couple together as well because their banter was so funny. The back and forth between them, like, Celine gave it to Bradley every single time, but Bradley is just so, he made me blush. Like, this young man made me blush so much. I know he made Celine blush. The pacing of this book, the beginning was a bit rough for me, but not in the pacing. I think I just didn't know how I felt about it, but like once we got to like around like the 100-page mark, things started moving along, and I was so into it, and I loved every second of it. And I love that it wasn't just a relationship that was focused on them as a couple, but also they had really strong relationships with their family, and I loved seeing aspects of their character outside of just being a couple and outside of just this relationship. So Celine is a TikToker who posts like conspiracy theories on TikTok, so I liked that kind of like dimension to her character. And Bradley, he has so much going on for himself. He's a book lover, he loves to read, he wants to be a writer, and I just felt like seeing his experience with that and seeing him kind of figure out what he wants to do as he moves on to college, what's next in his life after high school, and wanting to pursue writing and English. I felt like that was just something that I could relate to so much, of like not really knowing what to do with that and feeling like just feeling a bit discouraged, but also finding out that like it's okay to not know everything and it's okay to follow your passions and things that you love in life. And also Bradley does have OCD, so I thought it was amazing that we got representation in that, especially in a young person. And I know that this book is not a part of like the Brown Sisters trilogy. It's not related to the Brown Sisters in any way, but I do think Celine is like an adjacent cousin to Eve, Danny, and Chloe because she just reminded me so much. Like, I think she would fit so well into that family. But yeah, I absolutely enjoyed this one. Definitely read this book if you haven't already. I think you'd really like it. The next book is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This book, you guys, was so magical. Like, it was just everything I needed. I remember I picked this book up originally in August of last year, and I could not read it. I could not get into it. I had to put it down because I was like, you know what, Emily Henry, she deserves better than this. She deserves my undivided attention, and I cannot give it to her right now with this book. So I set it aside, and I was like, I'm going to come back to it. I didn't DNF it. I was like, I'm going to come back to it eventually. And then I recently picked it up in May, and I was just like, I think this is the right time for me to read this book. I read it, and it was absolutely amazing. Like, Like, I've read People Meet on Vacation and Beach Read, and People Meet on Vacation I gave 5 stars. I was really curious to see if this would top it, and I don't know if it's better than People Meet on Vacation, but I did give it 5 stars. Emily Henry, I will say, she just keeps getting better and better and better. Her writing is so impeccable. The way she's able to balance a really standout romance that's very deep and very real with like characters that have so much more going on for themselves other than just being in a romantic relationship with each other is just absolutely amazing. So Book Lovers follows Nora Stevens, who is a literary agent in New York, and she and her sister Libby take a trip to a small town in North Carolina called Sunshine Falls. Libby creates this small town like bucket list for things for them to do, mainly things for Nora to do, because some of the things on the list are like have a small town romance, and Libby is in a relationship with kids, so she's obviously not going to be doing that. And Nora agrees to this mainly because their relationship is kind of on the rocks. They're definitely not as close as they used to be, and Nora really wants to kind of build that relationship back with her sister, so she agrees to go on this trip and agrees to kind of do these things on this bucket list, kind of seeing it as an opportunity to connect more with her sister again. And then while they're at the town, Nora keeps running into Charlie Lastra, who's an editor back in the city, and they didn't have the best initial encounter. I wouldn't say this is like an enemies to lovers kind of situation, because I don't think they were enemies. I just think that they just didn't leave the best first lasting impressions on each other. But as they keep running into each other, they're able to kind of start to build this really beautiful romance between each other and build this amazing relationship where they're able to open up to one another and able to learn a lot from each other, but also learn a lot about themselves in the process. And I absolutely just adored Charlie. I don't know if he's my favorite book boyfriend, but he has ruined me. He didn't have like such a big presence in the book, but because there's so much more going on in the book in regards to Nora and her relationship with Libby, which I felt like was definitely the main plot, and the romance was more of like a subplot in the book. But Charlie, any single time we had a scene with him, I just fell in love with him. He's kind of grumpy, but he's also just very honest with himself. He's very honest with Nora. He's very honest about just the way he sees things, and I just really appreciate that honesty. And I saw that Nora herself, like as she was like engaging with him and speaking to him, she really was like, with her feelings, for example, like I need to be honest with Charlie because that's the one thing that he deserves is honesty. And I just felt like that was just so beautiful. And there's this scene after they were intimate with each other, there's this scene where Nora kind of feels like she needs to go, and the way that Charlie responds to that, that whole scene in general, the way he was just there for her and kind of was just like, if you want to go, that's okay, but if you want to stay, that's also okay, and if you need me to take you, like it was just so sweet. The way he just created such a safe space for her to decide on her own. She was able to be honest with him in that moment, and he was able to receive that in such a very important way that made her feel safe. I just feel like Emily Henry just does such an incredible job. If you are an older sister and you have felt like you had to kind of take on that more parent role with your siblings, I definitely feel like you will enjoy this book because you might be able to see yourself in this book. I'm a middle child. I connected to this book regardless, just because Emily Henry just writes such amazing emotional characters, and I absolutely adored this. I gave it 5 stars. Like I said, Book Lovers was definitely worth the wait, and it was definitely worth returning back to. The next book I read was Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings, and y'all, I have so much to say about this book. I am doing a reading vlog where I'm going to read all of the books in the Magnolia Parks universe that are out so far. I talk a lot about how I feel about this book, but this book I gave 3 stars. That is not to say I did not enjoy it, because I did enjoy this book, but there was just so much going on in this book. I felt like my feelings are so conflicted right now, and I'm not 100% sure if this book will stay 3 stars, but for right now, I think 3 stars is a very accurate rating for how this book kind of just made me feel as I was reading it. Magnolia Parks is the first book in a series set in high society London. It's rich and British. It has this group of friends in their 20s that are like super close with each other, but are also very messy. This book is very entertaining. It kind of reads like a reality TV show. There's a lot of like heart-wrenching moments in it throughout all of like the messiness of it all. Magnolia Parks is about our 2 main characters, BJ and Magnolia, who were written in the stars. They're this it couple, started their relationship when they were super young. Like they were essentially supposed to be together forever until they weren't. The book itself starts 3 years after they broke up, and despite them no longer being in a relationship with each other, they are still very much in love with one another, and they are still very much present in each other's lives. They have this like unexplainable connection with one another that I don't even know if they understand it, but they are in this very toxic cycle of hurting each other. So BJ will sleep with other women, and Magnolia will see that and get pissed off, and she will date other men right in front of him, and then he will see that and get pissed off, and then he will go sleep with other women again, and it's just like this ongoing cycle where they cannot stop hurting each other. And it's just so frustrating because it's like, why can't you guys just be together? But you also understand why there's this hesitancy to come back together just because of the nature of the breakup. There's just a lot of distrust and uncertainty, I think, in the relationship right now. It's really complicated. Like, the story is by no means black and white, and I feel like if you go into it kind of wanting this romance and kind of wanting a resolution and kind of wanting like communication, you're not gonna get that. This book is very polarizing. Like, people feel very strongly one way or another about it, and I understand why, but I think if you go into it open mind and you go into it kind of just like, I want to read about a couple that is very complicated, and I want to read about a couple and a group of friends that are very close with one another, and you're just here for a good time, you will enjoy it. I know a lot of people have compared this to Gossip Girl, and that Blair and Chuck are comparable to BJ and Magnolia. Definitely see that. It's just like set in London. So think of Gossip Girl set in London. This also reminded me of like 90210. If you remember that Hannah Montana episode, He Could Be the One, I also got that vibe in here. And I also got, if you liked the After books by Anna Todd, Tessa and Hardin are very ridiculous and they are very intense and toxic. I can see them in here as well, and I wonder if people who liked After like this book, because while I don't think they're as intense, they are definitely as toxic and maybe as messy as Tessa and Hardin. I only watched the first movie and I didn't read the published books. I read the Wattpad fanfic, but I'm just drawing parallels. I felt like this book was a good foundation for the rest of the books in the series. I didn't give it 3 stars because I hated it. I gave it 3 stars because there were just some things about it that I didn't love. One, this book is quite lengthy, and I felt like all of this book was just them going back and forth, and I felt like it could have been shortened a little bit. Some scenes just kind of felt repetitive or felt unnecessary. I just feel conflicted with this relationship. Like, y'all, get it together. Get it together. The writing just seemed off at times for me, but there are some beautiful lines in this book, and it's just like impactful the way that Jessa Hastings writes this love story that I understand doesn't look like a love story, but there's something there deep between Magnolia and BJ that I really want to explore more in their next book. I'm really excited to read the rest of the book series. So the next books that I read on my Kindle through Kindle Unlimited. So we're gonna start with Nightfall by Penelope Douglas, and I actually did a reading vlog a couple videos ago about kind of like my whole experience reading Nightfall, so if you haven't watched that and you're interested, make sure to check that out. So Nightfall by Penelope Douglas is the last book in the Devil's Night series by Penelope Douglas, and if you're not familiar with the Devil's Night series, it's essentially like a dark romance about the 4 horsemen, so a group of guys who were sent to jail a few years ago for some illegal pranks that they document on a phone, but that phone got in the hands of the wrong person and it was leaked out, so 3 out of the 4 of them were sent to jail. The first book in the series is about how when they come back, they essentially kind of plot revenge to ruin the life of the girl who they thought leaked this footage, and every book in the series follows one of the 4 horsemen and their love interests. So the first book of the series kind of definitely sets the foundation and sets like the tone of the series and kind of sets the plot. So if you haven't read the first book, while each book in the series is a standalone romance with the horsemen and their love interest, you have to read the first one to know what's going on in the next ones, because there's this underlying plot that follows all of the books and it won't make sense at all. So Nightfall is the last book in the series, and that follows Will and Emery's relationship, and I was so excited to read Will's books because Will, from the beginning, like, he was definitely a character where I was drawn to. I really was excited to finally get his perspective on things and to finally like just be in his head and like know who he is as a character from his perspective and not just the perspective of other people. But I did not love this book. Like, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and that's saying a lot because the other books in the series I gave 5 stars, I gave 4 stars, and I was so disappointed to give Will's book 3 stars. And y'all, this book was it was over 700 pages, and I just was like, I couldn't do it. I just didn't love it. I just felt like Will was just not himself in his own book, and I felt like the Will that I knew was not the Will that I saw. And I also felt like the romance in the present moment, because in the books Penelope goes between past and present. In the present moment, that Will was just not doing it for me. I was getting the ick at times. I was not obsessed with him. I wasn't liking him. I felt like the romance and the chemistry between Emery and Will in the present moment was lacking when you compare the chemistry to the other characters in their books. And I just felt like even though it was Will's book, we were getting a whole lot of nothing. Like, so much of it was just building Emery, which I understand because this is the first time like we're really meeting her as a character, whereas we've met Will before. But I felt like it's still Will's book, and like Will is still like the main character here, but we're just not getting enough of him. I still feel like there's so many things about his character that are just not very well developed in him. It's still a good book. You still get to see the other horsemen and interactions and moments with the other characters from the previous books that I love, but it was just not great. And then following that, I read Fire Night by Penelope Douglas. This is a novella novella that is after Will's book, and this is more about each of the four horsemen with their partners and kind of their life after the events that happened in Nightfall. The book's setup is Damon and Winter host a Christmas scavenger hunt at their house, and everybody in the neighborhood's invited. All the four horsemen and their families are invited, but something goes wrong and the gang kind of has to work together to kind of figure out what goes wrong. It's very exciting, but it was so short. Each chapter is one of the four horsemen, so Kai, Damon, Michael, and Will. It's so nice to see like Michael's perspective, because the first book in the series is Michael's perspective, and you don't get that for like the rest of the series until this novella. So it was really nice to kind of be back in the perspective of some of these guys. But it was also nice to just see more of like their families, because all of them have kids now, which they should not be having children, but it's nice to kind of see them with their kids, to see them as like parents and like what their parenting style is, because they're so different. I definitely feel like this book sets up the perfect spin-off series with their kids, especially one kid in particular. But I don't know if Penelope is planning on doing a spin-off series. I've heard that they are kind of like wrapping up on Devil's Night, like it's over, but I would totally be down for a spin-off series. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. I feel like the novellas, there's just never enough. Really sad that this is it for the Devil's Night series. I love the Devil's Night series, if you can't tell. It's like my favorite series ever. My favorite book was definitely Kill Switch. Damon and Winter are top tier. Like, you can't get better than that. The last book that I read on my Kindle, and the last book for this wrap up, was Two Wrongs Make a Riot by Chloe Leese. And this was my first Chloe Leese book, and I was super excited to read it. I've heard really good things about this author, and I really wanted to read it, so I picked it up on Kindle. This book follows our two main characters, Jamie and Bia, who didn't have the best first encounter with each other. They met at I think it was a Halloween party or like a masquerade party, and they just did not get along. Like, that first encounter was just not good at all. But Bia's sister and Jamie's roommate slash friend, they decided to play Cupid and trick them into going on a blind date with each other. And when they found out, they were absolutely pissed, and they came up with the most ridiculous revenge plan. Okay, so hear me out. They decided to fake date and pretend to be in love, pretend to be this super amazing couple, so Bia's sister and Jamie's friend and roommate can like believe that their plan worked, just for them to break up, to kind of like show them that like, hey, you shouldn't be meddling in our lives anymore, like back off. And I just felt like that didn't make any sense. Like, that whole fake dating revenge plot didn't make any sense to me. And I almost DNF'd this book like 74 pages in, because I was like, I'm not understanding this couple. I don't understand why this would even work. I didn't hate the characters, but I was just like, the plot is just not plotting. So I almost DNF'd it, but I'm happy that I didn't, because once we kind of got into the fake dating, they're spending more time with each other, their feelings start to become more real, they start to open up with each other. I really was into it. Like, Jamie was, oh my god, that man, please, for the love of God, please send me a Jamie. He was just so good. I absolutely love Jamie. Bia was just amazing. Like, she was so confident and she was so strong, and I just felt like these two characters together, like, they are so different from each other, but they worked so well together, and it was just like magic. Like, it was just magic when they were together. I love the building of their relationship. They had such good communication as well, and they just were able to express their feelings in such a beautiful way to one another. They made each other feel safe, they made each other feel heard. It was just amazing. I absolutely adored them. The steamy scenes they had together were some of the best spicy scenes I had ever read. Like, it was so good. Bia is autistic, she is also pansexual, and Jamie has social anxiety, and I just love the representation in those characters. I was just obsessed with this book. And then we got to the end. 90% in, we have a third act breakup. And I'm fine with third act breakups. I know why they happen. It's part of the romance formula. Like, I understand why they're there. Cause drama, cause some conflict. I get it, I do. But this third act breakup, y'all, was horrendous. I literally was so angry. And the reason why they broke up was so out of character. It did not make any sense. And then the way it was resolved was even worse. I felt like it was so unfair. It was awful. It was just so randomly placed. It literally felt like it was plucked from thin air. This book was going to be 4 stars for me. I gave it 3 stars. And I felt like 3 stars was because of the middle, because the middle chunk of this book was just fantastic. So it was like, I can't give it less than 3 stars. But the beginning was rough, and the ending, the very end, was rough. And I just was like, dang. So those are all the books I read for the month of May. I felt like this month was a really good reading month. I'm super excited to read the books that I have set for June. I will be starting with Daisy Hates, so continuing on with Magnolia Parks. So I'm super excited about that. Please let me know in the comments the books that you read this month in May. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what your rating were for these books, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!